everybody, welcome to the Patriot Show. I'm your host, Anthony Stephen Malone. I have a special guest today on the show, Roy McComb, former Deputy Director of the Police National Crime Agency. This is part 2 of his interview. We will be focusing on human trafficking of UK girls and boys around the United Kingdom. Some of this might shock a lot of people, but it's a very important interview. Some information has to be put out there. Hello, Roy. How are you doing?
Good to see you, Anthony. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend.
Always.
Yeah, good to chat.
Right. Some people might not have seen part 1 of this, which is on the Patriot website, on the YouTube channel anyway. Can you give my viewers a very brief overview of who you are and your background, please?
Yeah, and they should go and watch part 1. It was an interesting conversation. So, in short terms, my background is in law enforcement in the United Kingdom. I was 30 years as a police officer in Northern Ireland. When I finished, I was the head of organised crime for the country. And I was involved in the investigation of terrorism in Northern Ireland as a senior investigating officer. And then more recently as the head of organised crime. Before then, in 2014, I moved across to the National Crime Agency as a deputy director, and I had a variety of roles, one of which included being the national lead for modern slavery and human trafficking. And I worked in the National Crime Agency for 5 years, and I'm now working as an independent consultant on organised crime.
Great. And I know you're very experienced. You're very passionate about your job and everything that you did as well. And you did some outstanding work there to help keep our countrymen safe and our country safe as well. So thank you for your service. What we're going to do today is focus on the human trafficking of girls and boys who are British and foreign nationals around the United Kingdom. Can you give us a little bit of a brief overview of that?
I can. So if you think about human trafficking, if you think about the slave trade, particularly from West Africa across to the Americas that happened in the 17th century, 18th century, people think that it was, British slave traders seizing men and women from Africa, taking them across to the Americas then in exchange for some of the products in the Caribbean islands and then into the Americas. And that happened, and that was an horrendous part of our history. And people thought that in the 19th century then, when William Wilberforce, who was a British MP, helped to pass effectively the first anti-slavery law. And people thought that, well, that was the end of it, that slavery in the British context had ended. The reality, Anthony, is that that's not the case. The reality is that slavery and human trafficking not only still exists within the United Kingdom, but is in fact one of the largest criminal enterprises in the United Kingdom and indeed in the world. So just to give you a sense of the scale and the complexity, a number of years ago, and these are always quite difficult numbers to get your head around, but a number of years ago, an estimate was given by an international reputable organization that at any one time there could be up to 40 million people who were being enslaved or trapped in some form of forced labor or human trafficking condition. 40 million people. The estimate at that point was that this was a business effectively that was generating around $150 billion every single year, $150 billion. So the idea that this ended 200 years ago is a fallacy. The idea that this is not a huge international business is another fallacy. And the idea that this doesn't happen in the United Kingdom, or indeed doesn't happen in your neighborhood or your community or your village even, is also a fallacy. And the final one that I would mention is there is a belief sometimes that when we talk about human trafficking in the British context, that it's foreigners that are being trafficked into the United Kingdom and that it's not British nationals. the harsh reality, and I really want to emphasize this point, is that the largest single national identity of victims of trafficking are in fact British nationals. Now that's quite a shocking figure. The idea that, you know, our own citizens are being trafficked within our own country seems like almost a counterintuitive mindset, but the reality is you can be trafficked from the high street to the main street. You can be trafficked from the Shire to the city. You can be trafficked from, you know, Scotland to England. You can be trafficked from one street to the next, and you're still a victim of human trafficking. And so British nationals are the largest single national identity on the list of identified victims of traffic victims in the United Kingdom. And I think that's a point that really should be paid attention to by your viewers.
Yeah, it's a very sad topic, and it's a shocking topic as well. And I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at what you've just come out with there. And that's like the tip of the iceberg as well. There's so much more to it. The fact of British boys and girls, what age groups, we say boys and girls, what age groups have you come across?
So if you think about the process, let me just give you back a step. In almost any crime type, there's a measure of what we call an undercount, an underestimate, and the only true figure we have are those where people have been identified in the conditions of trafficking, in the conditions of slavery, and are voluntarily identifying themselves as victims. And that figure, when you put people through what's known as a national referral mechanism, which is the formal process to identify and to formally recognize someone as a victim. Last year, the figure was around 10,600 victims. Now that's a huge number, and certainly going back a number of years when I first joined the National Crime Agency, that figure was in around 2,500. So the number has simply gone upwards, and quite significantly upwards, over the last 5 or 6 years. But that's understood and recognized to be an estimate. A couple of years ago, the Home Office, when that formal figure was around 4,000 to 5,000, the Home Office did some statistical analysis and estimated that the true figure was more likely to be in the region of 10,000 to 13,000 people. And that was in, I think, 2014, 2015. Last year, a reputable organization in the United Kingdom did some assessment, and they reckon that the figure is closer to 100,000 people. Now, let me just give you the context of that, and we're both old enough, I might say so, to recognize the old Wembley Stadium seated 100,000 people. So that's a Wembley Stadium that is filled with victims of human trafficking every single year, filled with 100,000 people, and then filled again the following year with victims. That's a huge number. And if the greater number of those, or the largest single national identity, were British, you know, that's a section of Wembley Stadium which are just British nationals that have been trafficked into and around the United Kingdom. So your question around the age profile, well, globally, approximately 70% of the victims of trafficking are women. Obviously 30% of them would be men, and women, men, I'm treating male, female gender as opposed to particularly adults. There's an approximate figure of around 25% of all traffic victims globally would be children. Yeah. So if you take the global figure of around 40 million, there's 10 million people who are children who are being trafficked or held in some form of slavery. And if you put that figure into the context of the United Kingdom, you're talking around 2,000 plus children in the United Kingdom who are being trafficked. And those are in the formal statistics as opposed to the estimates. You'll be familiar, I imagine, with the concept of the county lines drugs phenomena in the United Kingdom, where the city drug dealers are using young, vulnerable people, particularly children, to transport drugs out to the rural parts of counties outside of the big cities. Well, that's human trafficking in a form. That's criminal exploitation of young, vulnerable people. And those numbers are beginning to feed into the overall understanding of the scale of human trafficking. So human trafficking isn't just a single entity. It spreads into the exploitation of children and young people in drug dealing and in other criminal enterprises. And so it's an insidious crime. It's a harmful crime. The idea that it doesn't do any harm to people is just wrong. I'm quite passionate about the idea that we're all consumers of things which are potentially under the control of criminals. So if you want to get your car washed, and these pop-up car washes are quite common nowadays, there is a crossover between people that are in the car washes and people that have been the victim of human trafficking. So if you're someone who's content to go and pay £5 to get your 3 Series BMW washed, and it doesn't occur to you that there are 6 Albanians washing your car, and that you're not bothered by that, pause and reflect and ask, think about the mathematics of that. Think about, how do 6 people earn a legitimate income if you're paying them a £5, that there's 6 of them washing your car, and all they do all day long in whatever conditions is simply to wash cars. Think about the fact that you as a consumer are part of the problem, and you could do more to try to stop human trafficking by the simple act of, for instance, not taking your car down to the dodgy car wash.
That's a very good point. It's also, I want my viewers just to take a couple of seconds there and think about that. It's got implications. Think about where you're going. Are you supporting this?
Yeah.
Worth thinking about. I know a lot of us don't.
Yep.
But you need is to take a step back and think about this, because these industries, illegal industries of human trafficking, are expanding every year. And it's like what Roy said, it isn't like a crimeless or painless thing. Some of these people, how we're going to get on it a little bit later in the interview, but some of the conditions that they live in and what happens to them is horrendous. In this day and age, not acceptable in any way, in any country. But we'll get on to that in a few minutes. Right, on this one, my viewers are going to be thinking, like, people in the UK, boys and girls being trafficked, how are they groomed? How are they recruited? How does that happen?
So, as in most criminal scenarios, the controlling mind of criminal organizations seeks out the people that they can exploit. And the exploitation can be often done by people that you know. So yes, there are people that are exploited by strangers, but oftentimes it's a bit like recruiting an intelligence asset. You're building a relationship up before you move them into the control of the person who wants them to do something. So you take the likes of the county lines, you've got vulnerable young people who are perhaps trying to pay off a debt that they've incurred, they've borrowed money from someone, or in fact, they might have a drugs habit themselves. So in order to pay off that habit, the criminal says to them, well, I can get you to do this, but what I need you to do is this. And they get moved into the criminal activity instead of simply being a buyer of drugs. They become a mover and a seller and a transporter of drugs. You take the slavery conditions, and you can be a slave in your own neighborhood. I mean, there are lots of examples where people have been living in really quite squalid conditions, and the slavery is the context of how are people living. So they've lost their rights, they've lost their liberties, they've lost their freedom of movement, they've lost their access to their identity documents, they've lost their own money, and they've lost the ability to live a free and open life, as we all become, as we all recognize. Lots of examples of, particularly in, there was a case in Lincolnshire some years ago where people living on the streets were then being recruited by farmers, this particular group that were involved in criminal activity, and they were offering to the people living on the street a roof over their head. And they were saying nothing more complex than, listen, come and work for me. I'll give you a roof over your head. I'll give you 3 square meals a day. And, you'll earn a decent living. I'll give you a few quid every month, every week. And you'll have a roof over your head. You'll be out of the cold. You'll have something meaningful to do. And of course, if you're living on the street, that sounds like a very reasonable and very acceptable proposition. So what happened then, that these people for years simply drop off the system. They just drop off the grid. They're not recognized anywhere else, and they're simply living in the conditions where the farmer has put them up. The living conditions are horrendous. They don't have the ability to move or to break away from the cycle of control. And they're working, 10, 12, 14 hours per day. They're getting paid pennies on the pound. Yes, they might have a roof over their head, but in effect, and there may not be the chains around their ankles, but there are effectively chains around their lives. And they're being held in almost in a visible environment where everybody can see them. Yeah. But it's the recognition that that's a slave condition, as opposed to people thinking that you have to have a chain around your ankle. Well, you can be a slave living in visible environment, and people often talk about human trafficking as being an invisible crime, and I slightly rankle with that idea. Yeah. I think it's a visible crime, but it's just not a recognized crime. And I think part of this conversation, if it does anything helpful, is to raise people's profile. They just think, now, what are people looking at, and what are they seeing, and what are they recognizing? Because it can be right in front of you. I was privileged in the National Crime Agency to help develop a program called Invisible People. And it actually was an award-winning national publicity campaign in which we took the images of slavery and we put them on sort of movable billboards and placed them in the city centres of the main cities around the United Kingdom. And it generated the conversation. People were coming up and asking the NCA officers, what's this about and who does this relate to? And it just started people thinking, well, actually, I begin to recognize that there are people in that field picking lettuces or picking potatoes. Could they be victims of trafficking? Well, yeah, they could be. Or people that are doing the car wash, or people that are working on the fishing boats, or whatever industry. And I suppose part of the conversation that we're having now, Anthony, is if this helps to raise the profile of what a victim of slavery or trafficking is, then it has served a good purpose.
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that point up there about what the public, what the perception is of what the public think trafficking is or modern day slavery is. What other signs can the public look for and see about trafficking, child trafficking, and child exploitation? Is there some warning signs that the public can actually look for?
So there are a number of warning signs, and it can depend on the nature of the trafficking. So let's take the slavery. So the slavery can be people working in conditions which are less than what you would work. Let's be very blunt about it. So we are as British nationals, we have an understanding of what would be a reasonable working condition. And if you're being asked to work in in an agricultural setting, you would expect to be given protective equipment. You would expect to be given, perhaps a fluorescent jacket. You would expect to be given, gloves and maybe some sort of equipment that would make you stand out if you're working in an agricultural setting. Well, if you're looking at someone who, for instance, may be a foreign national, may not be a British citizen, but who, doesn't speak English perhaps, or looks like he doesn't feel comfortable working in that environment, or looks like that they're being shipped in on a given day, every day in a van with 6 or 7 or 8 other people, and they're being moved around as simply hired help, and they're being corralled by someone who looks like they're being the controlling agent for them, who looks like they're being moved around almost like a posse, who don't have the right equipment, who don't have the right safety equipment, who are working in the most, difficult environment, who are working in all types of weather, then there's a question mark has to arise in your mind saying that looks a little unusual. And, if you take the likes of prostitution, and in prostitution, people quite glibly say, well, it's the oldest profession in the world. And, maybe it is, but actually what lies behind it is severe levels of exploitation. So women particularly, and there are some male prostitutes, and there are both men and women who voluntarily want to live a life as a sex worker, which is the more accurate term. There are people who want to live their life as a sex worker who are legitimate. They're not under any control. They're selling themselves voluntarily for their own reasons, and that is legally a legitimate thing to do. You may have a view on it morally, but that's a different question. But the vast majority of people that are involved in the sex trade in the United Kingdom are not there voluntarily. Now, I go back then to this business of a buyer and a seller, and let's take the simple version of a female sex worker and a male buyer, right? So if you're the buyer and you go into this apartment complex or this hotel room or whatever environment, and you're seeing a 19-year-old Thai girl or a Chinese girl or a young woman from Romania or Russia or someplace like that who speaks little if any English, who might demonstrate, who's been brought to the hotel or the room by some other man, perhaps, who's maybe a little bit anxious, who's maybe a little bit nervous. You have to ask yourself, how does someone like that get to be in this hotel room with me in downtown London or downtown Birmingham or whatever? And some of those things should spark in your imagination. Maybe this person doesn't actually want to be here. I mean, I'm fortunate in that I have daughters, and I know that none of them, when they were growing up, said to me at some point, when I grow up, I want to be a sex worker. Now, it's not to delegitimize people who do want to be sex workers, but the vast majority of people involved in the sex trade are there because they're being exploited. And so you, as a buyer of whatever that girl might be offering, have to ask yourself, well, am I part of the problem? And if you don't buy that person's sexual favors, you can help solve the problem. And so you're looking for the signs of, nervousness, anxiety, bruises. You're looking at the signs of control. You're looking at the person, working to the control of some other person, invariably a male, but it could be a female. You're looking at the fact that the person is being moved around from location to location. So we often talked about the chicken run in the sex business, which is girls particularly being moved from city to city on a weekly basis. And so they would go into Belfast for 1 week. Their names and their details would be put up on websites almost as a special offer, here for 1 week only. And then they would move on to Glasgow, and they would move on to Birmingham, move on to Cardiff, they'd move on to, wherever. And of course, between there and there, they might change their name. And, in Belfast, they're, Anna, and in Glasgow, they become, Elizabeth. In Birmingham, they become Fiona, whatever. But it's the same person, and they're changing their identity, they're changing their location. Those are the indicators that people are under the control and are being exploited. And again, I go back to the idea that if you are the person buying that service, the simple act of saying, I'm not going to do that, can change the dynamic and the relationship and almost the market economy of people that are being trafficked. Bottom line, traffickers who cannot sell their goods will have to sell something else.
Yeah.
And so that's my kind of real passion, that if we can change the dynamic between people who are buying a service and those that are offering for sale, then we can do some good.
Right. You touched on it there, social media.
Yeah.
Social media is being used by a lot of these trafficking networks and criminal networks. Yeah. What's your professional perspective on that, what have you seen?
So a number of years ago, the United States authorities, particularly the FBI, closed down a website called Backpage. And Backpage was, in its broadest sense, it was a bit like the Yellow Pages. You could buy, anything. But there was a section on Backpage that was being used particularly to sell sexual services. And the FBI identified this, undertook an investigation, ultimately closed it down, and people were prosecuted. But it was a huge industry, and Backpage was being used not just in the United States. It was housed in the United States, but it was being used as one of the most readily accessible websites around the world, including the United Kingdom. Well, we now have the ability for people to create a website within minutes. The ability to use Facebook within seconds, the ability to use social media, whether it's Instagram or whether it's Twitter, whether it's in TikTok, whether it's on whatever other social media. Organized criminals are what I would refer to as early adopters. They are the early adopters. They use technology and they adapt to the use of technology for their criminal purposes far quicker than the wider public, and certainly far quicker than law enforcement. So there's undoubtedly a clear linkage between the use of social media platforms and the exploitation by traffickers. Now, we've had conversations with platforms such as Facebook and others, and there's a challenge for Facebook and for companies like that to take away the ability for people to use their platforms. Their position, unfortunately, is that we provide a means. What people use it for is for them to figure out. We did some work in the National Crime Agency on the adult sex websites and to try to create a collaborative arrangement with these websites to first of all recognize that their sites were being used by traffickers, to understand the signs and the symptoms of trafficking, and to be more proactive in identifying those occasions where girls particularly were being trafficked. I mean, that's had some success, but I've done some work recently with United States authorities, and particularly in Miami, and to make the point about the sheer scale of this. I just presented some quick Google hits, and it's as quick as ordering a pizza, and that's the reality. When you can order a pizza and it comes after the girl that you've ordered to your hotel room, then we have a huge problem in this world, where the ability to order a human being for exploitation is as easy as picking up the phone and ordering a pizza.
Yeah, that is a reality. That isn't just hypothetical. That happens. I want my viewers to have a little think about that one. That is quite a disturbing fact that you've just come out with there. The social media platforms, we're not going to hit them with a big stick here. They are trying, they are working with the authorities. So we're not going to name any of them that are not. They all know that they could do a lot more. And there is other things ongoing within certain social media networks. But I will say one network, TikTok, has expanded exponentially over the past year. So it'll be very interesting to see if a lot of rules and regulations come in on TikTok as well, even if it's just from an ethical point of view. I think that should be looked at.
I might just jump in on that point as well, Anthony. The other element which is closely linked into human trafficking, or at least some of the technology can be overlapping, is around the world of child sexual exploitation. And if you're a groomer, like you're particularly a man, which is predominantly the type of person who's involved in grooming young children for sexual exploitation, social media sites are a real godsend. Effectively, the ideas of people who have a sexual interest in children being able to stand outside nursery schools and youth clubs and be able to recruit people. Well, they don't need to do that anymore, because the internet has enabled people to stay in the comfort of their home and to undertake identification and recruitment and grooming of people. The social media platforms creates the opportunities. And as I mentioned before, organized criminals particularly are early adopters of the technology, and they look at the opportunities for how they can use this new device, this new means, this new platform to identify and to recruit people. I mean, it used to be, when I was growing up, I used to be told that if you were home in time before the streetlights would go on, that you were considered safe, and your parents would be content that you were at home and therefore away from harm. The reality is that with the growth of the internet being in homes, and how many devices do we each have in our homes, from mobile phones to tablets to laptops to computers to Xboxes to PlayStations, all of which is connected to the internet, and all of which allows people from the outside to get into your home to be able to have really quite intimate conversations with you. And if you're a sex trafficker, if you're a person trying to groom a young person, the internet has made life incredibly easy for you to do those types of criminal acts.
Yeah, I just want to bring up a point here as well, because I'm a parent as well. Obviously, I've got concerns as a parent, so I'm going to speak as a parent now. Children who have got access to social media, I'm on about 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds going on all platforms, for example, Facebook as well, and TikTok. Now, they are not saying how old that they actually are. Okay, so a lot of men are looking at an 11-year-old girl who with makeup and the right clothing can look 18 to 20. All right. My advice would be to parents who are out there, keep an eye on what your kids are doing on social media. Okay, very important. I'm talking as a parent here as well. Okay, because sometimes we don't know what our kids are doing. And don't forget, a young child who's 10, 11 years old, 12 years old is very naive in the ways of the world. Okay, and there is predators, and I'll use that word, there's predators out there that actually try to search for young girls and boys online. Okay, so a word of advice to parents, keep an eye on what your kids are doing on social media platforms. Keep it open with your kids, so they're going to want to experiment, they're going to want to look at the platforms anyway. Okay, but leave it so if your kids have got a question or they feel uncomfortable about some adult who has befriended them, that they can come to you and ask your advice and ask questions. Roy, would you like to say anything on this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I would point out. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, Anthony. There are a number of websites that I would particularly point parents to, and one of them is run by the National Crime Agency, and it's called Think You Know, and it's think and then you, just the letter U, and know, Think You Know .co.uk, I think it is. And it is a really helpful website run by the National Crime Agency, and it provides all of the advice to parents as to how do you keep your children safe online. My children, when they grew up, were of a different generation, and they're past the point now, I think, where there's been this growth and this prevalence of the exploitation of people online. But I still would say to them, be careful about who you're talking to, be careful about what information you share. Don't assume that the person at the other end of the phone has your best interest at heart. And I think your use of the term predator is a use that I would support. The scale of people, the National Crime Agency estimates that there are in the United Kingdom 300,000 people who have a sexual interest in children. 300,000 people. That's the size of a large town, a small city. 300,000 people. who have a sexual interest in children. Some people will be at the low end of that, will have simply a passing interest. And then up to the very far end will be the high end, high risk predators who want to physically harm children. And that's a huge number.
Yeah, it is. It's important. Look on the internet, the National Crime Agency, the websites are there. If any parents are out there that have any concerns, contact the National Crime Agency or go and speak to your local police station as well. Don't put it off. If you have concerns, act on it. Better to act than not, then look back and think, I wish I did something when I thought something wasn't right. Get onto it, sort it out. It's your children we're talking about here, okay? And if you see something out there, this is a message out there to the general public. If you see something out there that doesn't seem right, it doesn't fit with adults and children, don't just turn a blind eye, okay? It isn't going to hurt if you go over and say, is everything okay here? Is this young one okay? Because if the little one turns around and says no, then you've got grounds then to stay and ask what is going on here. All right? Don't interfere in other people's lives, I'm not saying that, but look for the warning signs: slave labor, exploitation of children. It's an important point. And if the public get behind this, it can't hide in plain sight, because that is what it is now. It ain't all underground. A lot of this is in the open, and people just turn a blind eye and they walk away. Don't, all right? Because if it was your children there, you would expect someone to step up and do the right thing. So do the right thing yourself as well. Roy, can you talk a little bit about, we're not going to go into a great deal about it, but a lot of the money involved with these networks, it's a considerable amount of money. So the trafficking is organized crime of a very high nature. And a lot of this money is then sent out of the United Kingdom to help fund other organized crime networks as well. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on what your experiences of that?
Organized crime, for the most part, with very few exceptions, is driven by profit motivation. So anything that an organized criminal is involved in, for the most part, and with the exception of perhaps child sexual exploitation, the whole intention of whatever the criminality is to make money. So the more money they can make, then the more successful their criminal activity will be, which is, it's a real motivator. You know, they want to be growing their business, they want to make more money, and almost invariably that organized criminals have two criminal activities running in parallel. One is the substantive criminal offense, whether it's the drug trafficking or the human trafficking or the firearms trafficking, and in parallel, they'll be doing money laundering. Because if you make a lot of criminal money, you have to be able to launder it and to then live off the benefit of the clean money that has been cleansed from its criminal background. So there's always that kind of twin track approach. Not all of the money leaves the United Kingdom. Some of it does, but actually a large amount of criminal assets simply stay within the United Kingdom rather than it being shipped overseas. But there is a substantial sum of money that is being moved around over to Asia, over to the Middle East, over to Africa, the African continent, into the sort of Western Balkan area. The report that was done last year by the Criminal Justice Institute, or the Centre for Social Justice, I should say, estimated that the UK business of human trafficking is somewhere in the region of 3.3 to 4.3 billion pounds. And that's just around human trafficking and modern slavery. That's the combination of money that is being generated and criminalized, and money that is being lost into the legitimate business. 3.3 billion, just eye-watering figures, which means that if you have to move that amount of money, and it's relatively easy to move money electronically, but you have to set up the systems, you have to set up the structures, you have to have the trusted financiers who will understand the business end of things, who can set up bank accounts, set up electronic transfers, who can have the other end of it in the other country or the other location established. So oftentimes people that are involved in this criminal activity will also have advisors or supporters, professional facilitators who will help them launder their criminal proceeds, whether it's an accountant, a bank manager, a bank employee, someone who works in a money service bureau, who does money changing, someone who might be involved in the property business who's trying to help you launder money through property purchases or the purchase of cars or in other cash-rich environments. So it isn't just a case of there being one person who runs their business, makes money and launders it all themselves. These are businesses and they're set up and they run like businesses. And attacking this isn't just about rescuing the victims of human trafficking. It's about attacking the entire structure of the organized crime network from the one point all the way through the different interdiction points along the line, including the international element. And that's why it's increasingly important that law enforcement has developed the ability to work internationally, and why particularly the National Crime Agency has invested heavily in the world of international law enforcement, because we may be an island in the United Kingdom, but we're not really an island in terms of criminality, because we are still open for traditional, normal, legitimate business, and that allows people to carry out illegitimate business as well. So, organized crime no longer is simply a low-level, low-income, regionally based, locally based criminality on its own. It is truly an international business that impacts on the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. Well put there. And it's put in such a way that people will be shocked, surprised, but it will ram it home that this is a problem. You touched on there that how they move the money around as well. What we've noticed is as well, a lot of young people are being used as money mules as well to move a lot of the illicit money around the UK and internationally as well. It seems to be quite a prominent thing that's up and coming. So I think electronically that might be working with the National Crime Agency, stopping a lot of money being moved electronically, because the banks have got to be held accountable. But I've seen quite a large increase in young people who are trafficking also being used. Not just the traffickers, other young people being brought into this who think it's nothing wrong with moving 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, picking up from one place, moving it to somewhere else in cash. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
A number of weeks ago, there's an organization called the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner in the United Kingdom. We have really quite a developed and quite robust process in the United Kingdom. It's not without its faults, its flaws, its weaknesses, but the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner is there to make sure that all organizations are doing their level best to tackle human trafficking and slavery. And she released a report particularly around the financial sector and what it was doing and what it could do to tackle human trafficking. And this was done in conjunction with the financial sector. And she was quite robust in her remarks, because that's her role as an independent commissioner. And she simply said that more needed to be done by the financial sector to recognize the signs of trafficking, to understand how their systems as financial entities were being used to move money, to generate opportunities, to create the systems where traffickers could launder their money, and that there wasn't enough being done by the financial sector to recognize and to report incidences that could lead to human trafficking. Yes, there's still people who do the old-fashioned money mules. Yes, that still goes on. That's still a significant problem, both nationally and internationally. But increasingly, the more sophisticated organizations are moving money electronically. And let's be candid about this. If you're an international, sophisticated, organized criminal, the further you can move your money from the point of its criminality to its to your ability to use it, the less likely it is for law enforcement to be able to track it down. And so it really is incumbent on the financial sector to do as much as it can using its systems. And those people that I know in the financial sector, there's huge data sets within the banking industry, particularly, huge ability to analyze, identify, to see patterns, to see, to monitor accounts as legitimate means by which money can be, or accounts can be monitored. And so there's more that needs to be done. And the report by the Anti-Slavery Commissioner was really quite punchy in saying that more needed to be done, because it may just look like money moving, but at the end of that money being moved, there are human beings that are being exploited. And I mean, without being too controversial, if you go back for a moment to the world of sex trafficking, for every person that is sex trafficked, they are being sexually assaulted, they're being raped multiple times a day. I mean, that's the harsh reality. These are not the victims who are being sexually trafficked. They're not there, and they're not giving true, informed, willing consent to the sex act, which means that they are being raped, and that's happening multiple times per day. So it may seem like a sort of an academic, arcane conversation about the movement of money, but at the other end of it, there are human beings that are being trafficked, that are being victimized to the level of women, particularly, that are being raped multiple times per day for weeks on end. And the thing that is different from human trafficking compared to drugs trafficking is, once you've sold your kilo of coke, that's it, gone. You're not going to make any more money of that. But if you've got a woman that is being trafficked, or 3 or 4 women at your disposal, if I may say, you can traffic them for weeks, for months, for years, and the turnover and the profit margin becomes even more significant. So this is a huge industry. It's a sordid industry. It's a cruel industry. It's an evil industry, and we as consumers on the other side of it have a part to play to try to stop it.
Exactly. That is, thank you for coming onto the show. Thank you for doing such a candid interview. And I know some of my viewers now will be sat there thinking, what the hell? They wouldn't have known about a lot of this, or how it's all interconnected. I'll just like to say, we have just literally scraped the tip of the iceberg on this. There is so much more in depth we could go into this, but not at the moment. This is part 2 of Roy's interview. I would recommend you go back and watch part 1 as well. You'll find it just as shocking and informative, which is why we're doing this. It's to inform people so they get to know the facts of what is going on as well. Very important. I think a spotlight needs to be shone on this, because the trafficking is all part of other problems as well. But the rat lines and everything else, and organised crime, and all the connections with organised crime, with obviously organised terrorist networks as well. It's a lot of it's interconnected. So I'm glad that people like Roy, National Crime Agency, and other agencies all over the world as well, are working very hard to resolve a lot of the issues that we've spoken about in this interview. Before I close the interview down, Roy, would you like to say anything else?
Just one thing, and if your viewers are in the United Kingdom, if you have any concerns, don't feel embarrassed, but pick up the telephone and ring the United Kingdom's Modern Slavery Helpline. It's 08000 121 700, 08000 121 700. If you're in the United States, the number is 1-888-373-7888.
Okay, thank you. I will post that information and those numbers in text under the interview as well. So the information will be there with any other information as well. My phones are always on, as always. If anyone wants to fire me a personal message or contact me in absolute confidence, I do not have a problem with that. I am not an agency or a police force, anything like that. but I will pass your information on, or I will make sure that you contact or speak to the right people as well. They can help you. That is what they are there for. Okay. Right. I'd like to say, Roy, can you stay on the line for a minute? I'm just going to close down the interview. Thank you so much for coming on again. Okay. I know you have a lot on your plate at the moment, being who you are and your experience as well. It's been an honor having you on the Patriot show again. And I know I'm going to thank you on behalf of all my viewers as well. That was educational, emotional. It was shocking, but it was a very important interview as well. Okay. Right. So everyone, thank you for watching the Patriot show. Hope you gained some knowledge from that interview as well. Please stay tuned and watch a couple of adverts for veteran-owned businesses across the United States and the United Kingdom as well. Thank you for watching the show, everybody. Stay safe. Catch you on the next show. Thank you very much.